Today we're going to be looking at the parson. We're going to be breaking this down. Now, a big part of what we're going to look at with the parson is figurative language. So, just a reminder of how to take notes. What you'll do is, let's say that we wanted to take notes on this. Then what you could do is you could highlight it over here on the side, click add a comment, and then you can add your comment, add your notes, and then click comment. So you're just going to add your comment and then click comment, and it will add your notes there to the side, okay? Now I'm going to delete that because I don't need it. All right, so that's how you're going to be taking your notes today. But what I'm going to do is, I'm going to be taking notes over to the side, and whenever I take notes, if it's something you want to add in, then you can add that in. But I'm going to be actually writing some of my stuff, and I'm going to be writing some notes, and then some things that I'm going to do will just be, we're going to highlight them. So let me real quick get this comment off of here. Yes, I want to delete the comment. There we go. Alrighty. So let's get back to this. Alright, so first off, the parson. A parson is the priest of a small town. So he's the priest of a small town. So what are some things that we can get about this? So what we're going to do is before I actually get into this, I do want to talk a little bit. We talked about the nun and the monk, and one thing that you should note is one of the vows that they took was a vow of poverty, but we looked at both of them and saw that maybe they weren't living that vow correctly. A lot of people in the church were there for the status. I'm not going to say all, but a lot. The parson here, we're going to look at the description of him, and we're going to kind of look at how he's different from some of the others. So with that, it says he was a holy-minded man. He was poor, but rich. So what we have here is the idea that he's poor and rich. How can he be both poor and rich? Well, he's poor in material things. So that material wealth, he's very poor. But he's rich in holy thought and work. All right, and we get that, underline that. All right, the next thing, it says that he was patient when adversity was sent, for so he proved in much adversity. So he had problems, but he was patient in those problems that he had. Now this is a big one. He hated cursing to extort a fee. Rather, he preferred beyond a doubt giving to poor parishioners round about, both from church offering and his property. Now, this is really important because what do we know about him? And I'm going to go up here and I'm going to circle it. We know that he's poor, right? He doesn't have a lot. So he is poor. But even though he's poor, what does he like to do? So he will give even from his own. So what do we know about the parson? We know that the parson does not have a lot. But if his parishioners, and by the way, a parish is a town, the parishioners are the townspeople. So if his parishioners needed something, then he would give to them, even from his own property. All right, so let's underline this next part. He could find in little, he could find sufficiency. So what we get there is a little is enough for him. So a little is enough. All right. All right, this next part. It says, wide was his parish, with houses far asunder, yet he neglected not in rain or thunder, in sickness or in grief, to pay a call on the remotest, whether great or small. All right, so this part in green, it just, all right, let's, if we were to just break it down, if the house is, so his parish, so his area, the town that he is the parson of, has houses far asunder, so they're far apart. It says he neglected not, and you have to look at that. That means he did not neglect in rain or thunder, so despite the weather, so even if it's bad weather, in sickness or in grief, so the reason, to pay a call on the remotest, whether great or small. So, and then what you get from this is even, and by the way, the remotest means the furthest away. All right, so the farthest away, whether great or small, so like big or small. So big or small issues. So he does not say, oh, well, that's not a big deal, I'm not going to worry about it. Even if it's small, he's going to go to them and he's going to help. You could also read it, that it could be that if he's in sickness or in grief, or if his parishioners are sick or grieving. So let's just summarize what we've looked at so far. We know that he is poor in material wealth, but in his holy thought and work, he's a very rich man. Then we know that he has been through a lot of problems, but he's always been very patient. And even though he's poor, he likes to give from his own property if he must. He doesn't have to have a lot. He can, just a little bit is okay with him. It's enough for him. And even though his parishioners are far apart, even though the area that he is responsible for is very large, he will not neglect them, whether it's bad weather, no matter the reason, whether it's a big or small issue, he's going to go and he's going to help them. So what we're starting to see from this description is that the parson has his priorities in order. He knows that as the parson of this town, he is responsible for meeting the needs of his people before himself. On this next part that we're going to read, we're really going to start focusing in on some figurative language. The first piece that I'm going to give you is this right here. I'm going to highlight it in blue. So that's what I'm going to do. I would suggest that you go ahead and highlight the figurative language. And I'm going to point out a few things from this. So the first thing I'm going to point out is the word stave and sheep. So a stave is a staff. And then you've got the sheep. What we're getting here is a metaphor that's going to be used throughout several lines. So it's called an extended metaphor. All right, and how is it an extended metaphor? Well, you're going to see that on down a little bit further, I'm going to point out some more examples of how this metaphor is being used. So we have this metaphor, and as we look at the metaphor, I want you to get this, that the shepherd is the parson. All right, and then the sheep and this is something you might want to put over on your notes, those are the parishioners. And remember that a parishioner is just the townspeople. So he has a staff in his hand. That's going to give us this extended metaphor that comes down here. Okay? The shepherd is the parson, the sheep are the parishioners. All right, so I'm going to take that off. Hopefully you got those notes. So before we move on, we're going to get some more of that figurative language there. But I have a piece that we're going to get right here. It says he would add this figure to. That means that the parson would actually say this. This is not the kind of person he is. This is something that he believed. He says, if gold rust, what then will iron do? For if a priest be found in whom we trust, no wonder that a common man should rust. And so I'm going to highlight that because that's figurative language. And we're going to get this over to the side. And remember that this is something the parson would say. So this is something that he would say. This is not the narrator saying that this is what the parson needs to know. This is what he would actually say. And we're going to take three things. We're going to take gold, rust, and iron. And we're going to look at what is he trying to point out by using gold, rust, and iron. I'm going to put gold here. Then I'm going to put iron. And then I'm going to put rust. All right, so gold, iron, and rust. And what we need to do is we need to figure out, it says he would add this figure too. So what is he trying to point out from the gold, the iron, and the rust? If gold rust, what then will iron do? For if a priest be foul in whom we trust, no wonder that a common man should rust. All right, so let's look at this. So with what we've underlined, gold, rust, iron, priest, and common man, with all of those, we're going to go through and we're going to see what the gold, iron, and rust are representing in this figurative language. So what is gold? Gold is something that is pure. So the priest is going to be represented by the gold. All right, then iron is a little more common, right? So that's going to be the common man. And then rust is going to, and we don't actually have the word here, but if you can start to look at what rust means here, it means that it's becoming ruined, right? It's dirty. So rust is going to be representing sin. So with that, you have this question here, that if gold rust, what then will iron do? And if we were to replace gold, rust, and iron with priest, common man, and sin, then we get the question, if a priest sins, what will the common man do? And so I'm going to do this. If a priest sins, what then will a common man do? Do you see how you can look at that and you can take what's here and you can figure out what he's trying to say just by what he's given us. He doesn't literally mean gold, iron, and rust, and that's what makes it figurative. He doesn't literally mean gold, iron, and rust. He really means priest, common man, and sin. And so that's what figurative is whenever what you say is not literally what you mean. So you have a literal meaning, but you also have a figurative meaning. All right? So let's move on a little bit further. This next part, I'm going to highlight this right here. I'm actually just going to highlight that. It kind of goes on a little bit further. But I'm going to highlight that in our blue because that is figurative language. And this is going back to the shepherd and the sheep. All right, so we're looking at this right here. And I'm going to take this out, okay, because see those See those hyphens there? That can so the dash is there, let you know you can take that out. So if we just read it this way, a shame it is to see a shitting shepherd in a snowy flock. Now, this just means soiled. So if something is soiled, then it is what? It's dirty. Like if you have a soiled diaper, it's a dirty diaper. And then I'm going to kind of pull us back up here. And what it means by dirty is it can mean corrupt. Okay? Sinful. All right? So we have sinful and corrupt. So let's read this. A shame it is to see a dirty shepherd in a snowy flock. And snowy here means clean. So, because if a sheep is clean, it's going to be white as snow, right? So this is going to be clean. So it is and we said that the shepherd and the sheep, because the flock is a flock of sheep. So the shepherd is the priest, the flock is, those are the people. So let's replace that. A shame it is to see sinful and corrupt priest and clean, and I'm going to add the word pure. Clean and pure flock. Meaning, clean and pure meaning they're trying to do right. They are trying not to sin. So he's saying it's a shame to see that a priest can be sinful, and then the people who are following him try to be clean and pure. Does that make sense? So you can see how that metaphor is going there. All right, so this next part, I'm going to highlight because it's figurative language going along with the same metaphor. Okay, so it says, he did not set his benefice higher and leave his sheep encumbered in the mire. So this just means, and let's look at some of the words here. So this is just saying he did not set his benefice higher. That means he did not hire someone to come in and do his duties while he goes off to London. And you can look at that in the next line. So, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to cut this out right here, and it'll make it a little bit easier to understand what he's trying to say. He did not leave his sheep encumbered in the mire. So he, being the parson, and then the sheep being the parishioners or the townspeople, or I'm just going to say the people in his town. All right, so his townspeople. What does the word encumbered mean? And if you don't know what that means, and this is one thing that you have to do, notice that I'm telling you a lot of these words, but if you were to go through and you got to this part and you don't know what encumbered in the mire means, then you need to look up the word encumbered. You need to look up the word mire, and you need to know what those mean, because you cannot figure this figurative language out if you don't know what those mean. So, encumbered in the mire just means stuck in the swamp. Now, go back to, we learned about the mire whenever we talked about Beowulf, and meaning that we talked about how it's hard to walk in a swamp. It's difficult, it's dark, it's dirty. So, he doesn't literally mean leaving sheep in the swamp. What does he mean? It means he does not leave his people stuck in these difficult, dirty situations, right? So he does not leave his people stuck in difficult and dirty situations. And if you're not looking at the figurative meaning here, you're going to read through and think that he's really talking about sheep and shepherds. But he's not. He's talking about a priest, or in terms here, the parson, and the sheep are the people. So he's getting a lot deeper meaning at this point. We have another piece of figurative language here. He stayed home and watched over his fold so that no wolf should make the sheep miscarry. Continuing on with that figurative language, says that he stayed home and watched over his fold. And if you look up the definition of the fold, that is where the sheep are. So he's looking over his sheep, which we've said over and over again is the people in his town. But then, what does it mean by wolf? So that the wolf should not make the sheep miscarry. So the sheep are the townspeople. The wolf could be evil, or in the since we are talking about a parson, could be Satan. So what he's doing is he's watching over his people. So he's watching over his people so that the wolf does not, and I'm going to take this part right here, lead them to danger or to sin. Okay? Now, I'm going to make sure that you remember it's the people. All right, so we have more of that figurative language there. So getting that initial figurative language of him holding the staff and the parson being the shepherd and his people being the sheep, you've got to pick that up because it's talked about several times, and if you don't, you're going to think he's literally talking about a sheep or a sheep and a shepherd. All right, so that's a lot of the figurative language there, but you can go down the rest, and this next part really just gives a lot of direct characterization. And it talks about, you see the word never several times. It says never contemptuous of sinful men, never disdainful, never too proud or fine. So this is just saying that he was not, he didn't look down on people. He did not hate people. He did not turn his nose up at people. He was never too good. So even though he wanted people to do right, he never looked down on them. He was always trying to help them. All right, so then we get, and I'm going to do this in blue, then let's get some things that he is. It says that he was holy and virtuous. So even though he was holy and virtuous, he still didn't look down on other people. He was discreet in his teaching, benign. He was fair. So we get all of these things. Down a little bit further, it says that he sought no pomp or glory in his dealings. What that means is that he's not doing it for show. And I'm going to even add that here. It's not for show. All right. And then the last part, it says that he did all of this, but he followed it himself before. So what you're getting about the parson here is that he is a genuine person. And if you go back through all of the notes that we just took, he's a genuine person. And we get that based on the figurative language. There was a lot of figurative language and what he believed, what he had versus what he would give. And then a lot of the direct characterization. And I'm going to put this down here. This is a lot of direct characterization. So that's a lot of direct characterization in that very bottom part. All right, so that's about all I have to say about the parson. And just make sure that you got your notes. If you didn't, go back through, watch the video, and add some of those comments to the side.